I stood at the altar wearing white, and the fabric felt heavier than my own skin. People stared at me and I knew the looks were not about love. They were about curiosity, pity, and quiet jokes swallowed behind polite smiles. I told myself to breathe. I told myself this day was mine. "You look beautiful," the stylist whispered earlier, but her eyes slid away too fast. I learned long ago how to smile without believing it. "I'm proud of you," my aunt said as she squeezed my hand. Her voice trembled. I nodded because words felt too risky. Music played and I walked forward slowly. Each step felt like walking into a room where I was already judged. I kept my eyes on Ethan. He stood tall, perfect in his suit, calm like this was a meeting, not a wedding. When he smiled, it was practiced, neat, and empty. I told myself love did not always look warm. I told myself safety mattered too. "You okay?" he murmured when I reached him. "Yes," I said quickly. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. He nodded once. "Good." The officiant spoke about unity and devotion. I heard laughter somewhere behind me, soft but sharp. I didn't turn around. I focused on Ethan's hands. They never shook. Mine did. "I take you," he said clearly without pause. When it was my turn, my throat burned. "I take you," I said, forcing the words out. I meant them more than he did. That scared me. We kissed because that's what weddings require. His lips were cool, polite. He pulled back first. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced, "they are married." Applause filled the room, uneven and strange. Ethan's friends leaned toward each other, whispering. I caught fragments. "Unreal. He actually did it. Guess money really can buy anything." I pretended not to hear. I had practiced that skill for years. At the reception, I stood beside Ethan while people congratulated us. "You're very brave," one woman said, smiling too wide. "Ethan is such a catch." "Thank you," I replied. I wasn't sure what bravery had to do with love. Mrs. Hale approached, her heels sharp against the floor. She looked at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out. "Welcome to the family," she said. Her tone was flat. "I hope I make you proud," I said. She blinked, then looked past me. "We'll see." Ethan cleared his throat. "Mother, we should greet the donors." She nodded and walked away without another glance at me. I leaned closer to Ethan. "Your mom doesn't like me." "She doesn't like surprises," he said. "Am I a surprise?" He hesitated. "You're unexpected." That word settled in my chest like a bruise. "But you wanted this," I said softly. He looked at me, then really looked like he was measuring something. "I wanted the outcome," he replied. I laughed nervously. "That's a strange way to say marriage." "You'll get used to strange," he said. At our table, his friends raised glasses. "To Ethan," Marcus said loudly. "Always proving a point." Ethan smirked. "Cheers." I lifted my glass last. No one looked at me. During the dance, Ethan's hand rested lightly on my back. There was space between us, invisible but firm. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm happy," I lied. "You don't have to pretend with me," he replied. I almost asked what he meant. I didn't. I was afraid of the answer. Later, alone for a moment, I stared at my reflection. The dress fit. The makeup hid nothing. I whispered, "This is real." I needed to hear it. Ethan appeared behind me. "We should leave soon." "Already?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "The important part is done." My heart skipped painfully. "The important part?" He met my eyes in the mirror. "The agreement," he said quietly. Something twisted inside me. "What agreement?" He straightened his jacket. "You'll understand later." As he walked away, laughter followed him. I stood there, frozen, holding my bouquet like a shield. I didn't know why my chest hurt. I only knew that the wedding everyone laughed at had just begun, and I was already alone. That I learned the shape of silence after the wedding. It sounded like Ethan clearing his throat instead of kissing me goodnight. It felt like space on the couch between us, wide enough to fit a stranger. "Long day," he would say. "I'm tired," I would answer. We spoke like co-workers sharing an office, not like newlyweds sharing a life. One evening I asked, "Do you want dinner together?" He glanced at his phone. "I already ate." "Oh," I said. "Okay." Another night I tried again. "We could watch something." "I have calls," he replied. "Maybe later." Later never came. Touch never came. I told myself people loved differently. I told myself patience was mature. When his friends visited, the air changed. Marcus lounged like he owned the place. "So this is domestic life?" he said, eyes flicking to me. "Wild." Clara laughed. "Honestly, Ethan, you're full of surprises." Ethan smiled. You haven't seen anything. I poured drinks quietly. Marcus leaned toward Clara. He actually went through with it. Clara smirked. I said he wouldn't last a month. I pretended not to hear. That skill came easily. One night I went looking for Ethan. Music and laughter spilled from the study. The door was half closed. I stopped when I heard my name. Marcus said, You really married her. That takes commitment. Clara laughed. Or a strong stomach. My chest tightened. Ethan replied calmly, That was the point. Marcus snorted. Still can't believe this was the bet. My breath caught. Clara said, Spell it out again. I love this story. Ethan sighed like he was bored. I said I could marry anyone and still win. Anyone. No feelings. No damage. Marcus chuckled. And you picked her. She was the safest choice, Ethan said. No competition. No risk. Clara added, Just a body to prove the point. They laughed together. Loud. Easy. Marcus said, So what do you get if you last a year? Ethan answered, Control. Reputation. Proof. And she gets. Clara asked. Security, Ethan said. That's generous enough. My legs felt weak. I pressed my hand to the wall. Marcus lowered his voice. Does she know? Ethan paused. She doesn't need to. Clara said, You're cruel. I'm honest, he replied. There's a difference. Someone knocked on the door from inside. Drinks are empty, Marcus said. Wife duty. I stepped back quietly before the door opened. My heart pounded like it wanted to escape my body. I walked to the bedroom in a haze. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. My reflection looked the same, but something inside me had cracked open. When Ethan came in later, he loosened his tie. You're still up. I couldn't sleep, I said. He nodded. You should rest. Ethan, I asked carefully, why did you marry me? He froze for half a second. We've talked about this. Have we? I whispered. He turned away. You're overthinking. I watched his back. Do you ever regret it? He answered without turning. Regret is inefficient. I lay down facing the other side. He didn't touch me. My chest hurt, but my eyes stayed dry. I understood then. My marriage was never about love. It was a performance I never agreed to. I closed my eyes and let the truth settle in my bones. I slept beside a stranger who had already won, and I didn't know yet how much it would cost him. I used to believe love was quiet. I told myself that because Ethan rarely spoke to me unless necessary. I replayed memories and forced meaning into them. When he handed me a glass of water without looking up, I called it care. When he asked if I needed money, I called it concern. When he never asked how I felt, I told myself he respected my independence. That lie shattered slowly. One morning I said, Do you ever think about how we met? He buttoned his shirt. What about it? I thought it mattered to you, I said. He paused. It served its purpose. My stomach dropped. Served what purpose? He sighed. Why are you digging for problems? I'm not digging, I said. I'm drowning. He turned to me then, irritation clear. You're being dramatic. That word followed me all day. Later I tried again. When you look at me, what do you see? He didn't hesitate. My wife. That's it. I asked. What else do you want me to say? He replied. I want you to say you see me, I whispered. He rubbed his forehead. This is exactly what I meant. Meant by what? I asked. Insecurity, he said calmly. I laughed, sharp and broken. So this is my fault now? No, he said. But it's your issue. That night I stood in front of the mirror and studied my face. I asked my reflection, was I really that easy to ignore? The silence answered me. Days passed with careful distance. At dinner I asked, Did you ever plan to love me? He set his fork down. Love wasn't part of the agreement. So the bet was real, I said. Yes, he answered. But you benefited too. I stared at him. By being humiliated? You have stability, he replied. Most people would be grateful. I wanted a partner, I said. You wanted a fantasy, he corrected. My chest ached. Did you ever feel anything? He thought about it. That pause hurt more than his words. Affection, he said finally. Respect. Respect. I echoed. Yes, he said. You didn't demand more than I offered. I flinched. So my silence made me valuable. It made things simple, he replied. I remembered every time I stayed quiet. Every time I swallowed questions. Every time I told myself love didn't need warmth. I sat on the bed later, staring at his empty side. I blamed myself. I whispered to no one. I thought if I were different, you'd see me. Ethan stood in the doorway. You shouldn't talk like that. Like what? I asked. Like a victim, he said. I laughed softly. I married my abuser and defended him. What does that make me? He frowned. I never hurt you. You used me, I said. I was honest, he replied. You were strategic, I said. There's a difference. He crossed his arms. I never promised love. You promised marriage, I said. I thought that meant something. To you, he said. I felt tears rise but refused to let them fall. Did you ever look at me and think I deserved better? He hesitated. Deserve is subjective. That answer broke something final inside me. Later, alone in the bathroom, I pressed my palms to the sink and breathed. You're not unlovable, I told myself. You were just convenient. The words tasted bitter but true. When Ethan came to bed, he reached for the light. I said, don't touch me. He froze. What? I said don't, I repeated. He pulled his hand back. This is unnecessary. So was the bet, I said. Silence filled the room again, but this time it felt different. It felt honest. I turned away and whispered into the dark. I loved a man who never saw me, and I taught myself to disappear so he wouldn't have to. My chest hurt, my head ached, and my heart felt small. Still, somewhere under the pain, a quiet truth settled in. He never planned to love me. And for the first time, I stopped planning to earn it. I waited until the house was quiet before I spoke. Ethan sat across from me, scrolling through his phone like this was any other night. I said, I know about the bet. He looked up slowly. What bet? The one where you married me to prove a point, I said. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. He leaned back. You were eavesdropping. I was listening, I replied. There's a difference. He sighed. If this is about Marcus running his mouth. Don't, I said. Don't soften it. He studied my face, searching for tears. So what now? I wanted to hear it from you, I said. Say it clearly. He hesitated, then shrugged. Yes, it was a bet. That's it. I asked. You're still here, he said. Nothing's changed. Everything changed, I replied. He stood. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I stayed seated. You married me without love. I married you with honesty, he said. No, I said. You married me with strategy. He frowned. Why aren't you crying? I looked at him. Because I already did. Just not tonight. Silence stretched between us. You're angry, he said. I'm tired, I answered. Tired of what? He asked. Tired of shrinking, I said. Tired of convincing myself crumbs were enough. He crossed his arms. So what do you want? I thought about that. Nothing from you. That startled him. That's not realistic. It's necessary, I said. He stepped closer. You're my wife. And you're my lesson, I replied. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. You're being cold. I'm being clear, I said. He scoffed. You'll regret this distance. I regret begging, I answered. I stood up and walked past him. My hands shook, but I didn't stop. In the bedroom, I pulled a suitcase from the closet. I folded clothes carefully. Each shirt felt like a goodbye I never got to say. Ethan appeared in the doorway. What are you doing? Making room to breathe, I said. This is dramatic, he said. So was marrying me as a joke, I replied. He opened his mouth, then closed it. You're overreacting. I'm underreacting, I said. I didn't scream. That doesn't make you strong, he said. No, I agreed. It makes me done. He watched me zip the suitcase. Where are you going? The guest room, I said. That's childish, he replied. Begging was worse, I said. As I passed the hallway, I noticed Nora standing near the stairs. She looked away quickly, pretending to dust. Our eyes met for a second. She didn't smile. She nodded. In the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. The silence here felt different. Honest. Ethan stood in the doorway again. You'll come back, he said. Not tonight, I replied. Not ever, he asked. I met his gaze. I won't disappear again. He waited for more. I gave him nothing. When he left, I lay down fully dressed. I whispered into the dark, you matter, and this time I meant myself. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't cry either. That felt like survival. I started writing because silence had nowhere else to go. I sat at the small desk in the guest room and opened a blank notebook. I don't know who I am without him, I wrote, then crossed it out. I forgot who I was with him, I corrected. The words came slowly then faster like something unclogged. When Nora knocked to bring tea I didn't hide it. You write late, she said softly. I think late is the only time I hear myself, I replied. She placed the cup down. You deserve to be heard. That sentence stayed with me. Later I asked her, do you think people get used to being treated small? She nodded. Sometimes they mistake survival for love. I swallowed. I did that. She didn't argue. She just said, you're not doing it now. Ethan noticed the change quickly. You've been distant, he said one evening. I'm resting, I answered. From what? He asked. From pretending, I said. He frowned. You're acting like I hurt you. You did, I replied. I gave you everything, he said. You gave me space and called it generosity, I said. He paced. This withdrawal is manipulative. I looked up. I learned it from watching you. That shut him up for a moment. Later he said, you're punishing me. I'm protecting myself, I answered. He laughed sharply. From what? Comfort. From disappearing, I said. I wrote again that night. I accepted crumbs because I was hungry, I wrote. I thought hunger meant love. My hand shook but I didn't stop. The next day Ethan said, you're changing. I'm remembering, I replied. You're becoming difficult, he said. I was always difficult, I answered. You just benefited when I stayed quiet. He slammed a door. The sound didn't scare me like it used to. Nora caught me in the hallway later. He doesn't like losing control, she said gently. I know, I replied. That's how I know I'm doing something right. At dinner Ethan said, you're ungrateful. I said, you're uncomfortable. He scoffed. This was supposed to be simple. That's the problem, I replied. I'm not simple. He leaned forward. You knew what you were getting into. I knew marriage, I said. Not a transaction. He went quiet then said, you're rewriting history. No, I said. I'm finally reading it. That night I wrote until my wrist ached. I wrote about mirrors and how I avoided them. I wrote about how I apologized for taking up space. I wrote about how love felt like something I had to earn by being less. Ethan knocked once. You're shutting me out. I'm letting myself in, I replied. He didn't answer. I closed the notebook and whispered, you're not unlovable. You were just convenient. The pain was still there, sharp and present, but beneath it was something steady. Awareness. It didn't heal me. It woke me up. I stopped shrinking the morning I realized no one was going to hand me permission. I woke up before Ethan, stood in front of the mirror and said quietly, this body is mine. The words sounded strange but they stayed. When I pulled on my shoes Ethan mumbled, where are you going? I said, out. He blinked. Out for what? I replied, air. He frowned, confused by the lack of explanation. Later, while I stretched, he asked, since when do you take care of yourself like this? I said, since I noticed I was disappearing. He scoffed. That's dramatic. I answered, so was neglect. At breakfast he watched me eat without commentary. Finally he said, you didn't ask if I wanted eggs. I said, you can ask. He stiffened. You used to just know. I looked at him. I used to guess. I booked an appointment and told him after. I'm seeing a therapist, I said. He asked, why? I replied, because I matter. He laughed, uneasy. Is this about me? I said, everything was about you. This isn't. Dr. Celine Park smiled gently and asked, what brings you here? I said, I lost my voice. She asked, who took it? I said, I offered it. She nodded. And why now? I said, because silence started hurting more than truth. When I got home late Ethan said, you didn't check in. I said, I didn't feel the need. He crossed his arms. That's not how marriage works. I replied, marriage isn't ownership. He stared at me like I'd changed languages. At dinner with friends Marcus joked, you're quiet tonight. I said, I'm listening. Clara said, to what? I smiled. To myself. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Marcus muttered, someone's confident. I replied, someone's awake. On the drive home Ethan said, you embarrassed me. I asked, by speaking? He snapped, by not being who you were. I said, who I was didn't survive. Silence filled the car. In my next session Dr. Park said, notice how people respond when you stop apologizing. I said, they get nervous. She replied, because confidence removes leverage. I asked, what if he hates this version of me? She said, what if you love her? I stopped softening my voice. I wore what I liked. When Ethan said, you don't need to prove anything, I answered, I'm not proving. I'm choosing. He shook his head. I don't recognize you. I said, you never met me. Nora smiled one evening and said, you look taller. I said, I finally stand straight. That night, alone, I whispered, I belong to myself, and for the first time I believed it. The first time I noticed the shift, Ethan said, people are asking questions. I asked, about what? He said, about us. I replied, we exist. That's not new. He rubbed his jaw. They're saying you're composed. I smiled slightly. I am. At a charity dinner, a woman leaned toward me and said, you handle things with grace. I said, thank you. Ethan stiffened beside me. Marcus avoided my eyes. Clara whispered, you've changed. I answered, I stopped performing. On the drive home, Ethan said, you didn't defend me. I asked, from what? He said, from their assumptions. I replied, I didn't hear lies. He snapped, they think I'm the villain. I said, what you think matters more. Days later, Marcus cornered me in the kitchen and said, you okay? I said, I am. He hesitated. He didn't mean for it to get ugly. I looked at him. Ugly was always there. He swallowed. It was a joke. I said, jokes end. Consequences don't. He nodded, uneasy, and left. Ethan grew restless. Why won't you talk to me? He asked one night. I said, I talk. I don't beg. He said, I miss how you needed me. I replied, I miss respecting myself. He laughed sharply. You're enjoying this. I said, I'm surviving. At another event, a man said to Ethan, you married well. Ethan forced a smile. I said nothing. Later he whispered, say something. I asked, what would you like me to say? He said, that we're solid. I replied, are we? He looked away. Marcus stopped coming around. When Ethan called him, I heard, I can't keep defending you. Ethan said, you owe me. Marcus replied, I owe myself. The line went dead. Ethan stared at his phone. He's choosing you, he said bitterly. I said, he's choosing truth. Ethan tried tenderness. Remember when you laughed more? He asked. I said, remember when you lied less? He tried anger. You're ruining my reputation. I said, I didn't start the story. He tried fear. Don't leave me like this. I said, I didn't leave. I stepped back. At therapy, Dr. Park asked, how does his panic feel? I said, quietly satisfying. She asked, why quietly? I said, because it isn't revenge. It's balance. She nodded. Let it be. One evening Ethan said, tell them I love you. I said, do you? He paused too long. I said, there's your answer. He whispered, I can fix this. I replied, you can't undo what taught me who I am. When invitations slowed, he said, they're freezing me out. I said, they're seeing you. He said, you're supposed to be on my side. I answered, I'm on mine. Marcus sent a text, I'm sorry. I replied, be better? That was all. Ethan watched me pack a bag and said, you're winning. I looked at him. This was never a game. I closed the door softly, and for the first time the silence felt earned. I knew the apology was coming before he spoke because the house felt careful. Ethan stood near the window and said, can we talk? I said, we always talk. He said, not like this. I sat down and said, then say it. He rubbed his hands. I'm sorry. I asked, for what? He said, for the bet. I nodded. Say it clearly. He swallowed. I married you as a bet. I said, again. He said, I thought I could do it and feel nothing. I asked, and? He said, I was wrong. I said, go on. He said, I underestimated you. I smiled sadly. Everyone did. He said, you're stronger than I thought. I replied, I didn't grow stronger. I stopped shrinking. He said, I regret it. I asked, regret losing control or regret hurting me? He paused. Both. I said, that matters. He stepped closer. I never meant to destroy you. I said, intent doesn't erase impact. He said, I know. His voice cracked. I fell in love. I asked, when? He said, when you stopped chasing me. I said, that's not love. He said, "It is for me." I replied, "That's the problem." He tried to touch my hand. I moved it away. He said, "Please?" I said, "No." He said, "I'm being honest." I answered, "You're being late." He said, "I was scared." I asked, "Of me?" He said, "Of myself." I replied, "You should be." He said, "I'll tell everyone." I asked, "Tell them what?" He said, "That it was my fault." I nodded. "Do that." He said, "And then we can start over." I said, "No." He frowned. "Why not?" I said, "Because apologies don't rebuild what contempt destroyed." He sat down heavily. "I don't recognize you." I said, "Good." He said, "I miss the woman who needed me." I replied, "I miss the woman who thought she did." He said, "I can change." I asked, "Why now?" He said, "Because I'm losing you." I answered, "You lost me when you made me a prize." Silence stretched. He said, "I hate myself." I said, "Sit with that." He said, "You don't have to be cruel." I replied, "I'm being clear." He said, "Clear feels cruel." I said, "Truth often does." He tried again. "I love you." I asked, "Do you respect me?" He hesitated. I said, "There it is." He whispered, "I'm learning." I said, "I'm done teaching." He said, "You're punishing me." I replied, "I'm protecting myself." He looked up. "So this is it?" I said, "This is me choosing me." He said, "After everything?" I answered, "Because of everything." He said, "What about vows?" I said, "Vows require honesty." He said, "I'm honest now." I replied, "Now is too late." He cried quietly. I never thought I'd feel this small. I said, "Now you know how I lived." He said, "Can't you forgive me?" I asked, "Forgiveness or access?" He said, "Both." I shook my head. "You don't get both." I stood. "I accept your apology." He looked hopeful. I added, "I reject your request." His shoulders fell. "So you forgive me but won't stay?" I said, "Yes." He asked, "How can you do that?" I said, "By loving myself more than the idea of us." He said, "You're walking away from security." I said, "I'm walking toward dignity." He said, "You'll regret this." I replied, "I already survived worse." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I believe you." He whispered, "I love you." I answered, "Love without respect is cruelty." I went to the door. He said, "If I had met you differently." I paused. "If you had seen me differently." I opened the door. "Goodbye, Ethan." He said my name like a prayer. I closed the door like a promise. I stepped into the grand ballroom and felt every eye tilt toward us. Ethan stood beside me, polished, confident, and still convinced he controlled the room. I whispered, "Remember, I speak my truth tonight." He glanced at me, raising an eyebrow, but said nothing. As we reached the stage, Lena's camera clicked. She mouthed, "Are you ready?" I nodded. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, voice steady, "I want to clarify something about my marriage." Ethan shifted beside me, tense. I ignored him. "I am separating from Ethan Hale." The room froze. Glasses paused midair. Conversations halted. He opened his mouth. I held up my hand. "Please don't interrupt." His jaw tightened. "This isn't dramatic," I continued. "It's necessary." Whispers began, but I kept my tone calm. I entered this marriage seeking love and partnership. I realized I was given neither. A few people gasped. Lena's pen scratched across her notebook. "I want to be clear," I said, meeting Ethan's cold eyes. "This is not a result of misunderstanding or temporary frustration. It is a choice I make for myself. My dignity and my self-respect come first." Ethan tried again. "You're embarrassing me." I smiled softly. "No. I'm reclaiming myself." He glared, but the tension shifted. People weren't whispering about me the way they had in the past. They were watching. A woman from the back asked, "Is this permanent?" I said, "Yes, it's permanent. And necessary." Ethan's friends exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus's expression betrayed guilt. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. He realized he had no words that could undo what I had declared. I took a breath and continued, "I hope we all understand that respect can't be earned through wealth, power, or appearances. It must be given and received genuinely. I won't stay in a place where that is absent." Lena whispered, "Perfect." I nodded. I glanced at Ethan. "Your choices are yours. Mine are mine." The audience leaned in, silently acknowledging that my words carried weight, unshaken by his status or influence. He muttered, "You don't understand," I interrupted. "I understand perfectly. I understand myself." I turned to the room. "I will be moving forward independently, embracing my life on my own terms. I hope this inspires anyone who feels invisible to find their voice as I did tonight." The applause began, gentle at first, then swelling. Ethan's face hardened, realization settling in. His power in the room, his influence, had quietly slipped as I claimed mine. As I walked off the stage, heads turned, and Lena's camera caught every moment. She smiled and said, "You own that." I replied, "I chose myself." In the hallway someone whispered, "She's brave." I straightened, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. Ethan remained behind, frozen, as if watching someone he had underestimated all along. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had said my truth, and for the first time publicly, my dignity was unshakable. People would remember me, not as the woman who was mocked, but as the woman who chose herself and nothing else mattered. By the time I reached the exit, I felt lighter, whole, and undeniably present in a world that had tried to shrink me. I was in Dr. Park's office when my phone buzzed. "Another email," she said, raising an eyebrow. I picked it up and froze. Ethan Hale had lost another major partnership. The words on the screen felt surreal. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just felt calm. "I see it's hard to react," Dr. Park observed. I don't know what I feel," I admitted. "Part of me wants to gloat, but mostly, it's just relief. Closure, maybe." She nodded. "Closure often doesn't look like fireworks. It's quiet, almost invisible. What matters is how you respond to it." Later that week, Lena called. "Word is Ethan's been isolated at all the usual events. People are noticing. His reputation is slipping." I said nothing at first. "You mean, the elite circles he depended on?" "Yes. Without the image, his influence is gone. And Marcus is distancing himself too," she added. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the news. "It doesn't feel satisfying," I admitted. "I thought I would feel vindicated, maybe happy. But I don't. I just feel free." "That's the point," Dr. Park said. "Revenge is temporary. Self-respect lasts." I thought about the years I spent shrinking myself, chasing approval that was never mine to earn. I thought about every time I asked Ethan for affection, for recognition, for a semblance of love, and got nothing. Later I spoke to Nora on the phone. "You won't believe this," I said. "Ethan's losing everything he counted on. But it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like natural consequence." Nora's laugh was soft. "Finally, the universe catches up." I smiled quietly, a different kind of smile than before. It wasn't gloating. It was understanding. Life had a way of balancing itself out without my interference. My pain, my healing didn't require his suffering, it only required my own strength. During our next therapy session, I reflected aloud. I keep expecting relief to look dramatic like in movies, but it's subtle. I feel light not because he's failing but because I stopped carrying his weight in my heart. Dr. Park nodded. "Exactly. You've shifted your focus from him to yourself. That's empowerment." Over the next few days, the news kept trickling in. Investments fell through. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends of convenience disappeared. I heard about Clara whispering, Marcus avoiding him, even Mrs. Hale's forced smile when she mentioned me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel pleasure in his misfortune. I only acknowledged it silently, like a teacher noting a lesson finally learned. I walked in the park one afternoon, feeling the wind brush my face. I remembered how I used to shrink when Ethan's friends laughed at me. I remembered nights spent staring at the ceiling, wishing I were invisible. I felt no bitterness anymore. "I'm done carrying him," I whispered to myself. Done carrying the hurt. Done expecting the world to validate me through his failures or triumphs. Karma had done its work quietly. I didn't have to touch it. I didn't have to orchestrate it. And I didn't feel anger. I felt completion. That evening I wrote in my journal, "I am whole. I am enough. I am free from the shadows of someone else's choices." And that is more powerful than any revenge I could imagine. I closed the book and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered like scattered stars. For the first time in years, I felt my life belonged to me entirely. I had survived the storm. I had grown. And no one could take that away. I turned the key in the lock of my new apartment and let the door swing open. It smelled faintly of paint and possibility, and I inhaled deeply. Finally, I whispered to myself, "This is mine." Nora's voice came through my phone speaker. You sound lighter. I feel lighter, I admitted, setting my suitcase down. I keep expecting something to feel wrong, like guilt should follow me. But it doesn't. You earned this, she said softly. You don't have to apologize for taking space. I smiled, walking over to the window. The city sprawled beneath me, alive and indifferent. I used to shrink, I murmured. I used to make myself small so people could feel bigger, so Ethan could feel untouchable. I don't do that anymore. Good, she replied. You shouldn't. I laughed quietly, almost to myself. Do you know what it feels like to finally see yourself clearly? Nora paused. Tell me. I look in the mirror, I said, pacing the room, and I don't just see the scars, the weight, the things I've carried. I see someone who survived. Someone who decided her worth isn't defined by anyone else's hands, their bets, or their judgment. That's powerful, Nora said. I sank onto the couch and hugged a pillow to my chest. I'm scared too, though. Scared I'll slip back into being small, hoping for someone's approval, letting them shape my reality. You won't, she said firmly. You've built walls strong enough to protect your heart. I closed my eyes, feeling it settle in, a combination of fear and freedom. I have a life to build, I said aloud, almost like a promise to myself. Not to impress anyone, not to meet anyone else's expectations, but for me. My own rules. My own space. My own choices. Nora laughed softly. Sounds like someone finally took her life back. I did, I whispered. And I will keep taking it back every single day. Starting with today. I went to the kitchen and unpacked a box of dishes. Each plate, each mug felt like a small victory. Ethan's cold indifference, his cruel bet, the years of being invisible, it all felt farther away than the street below me. I didn't feel anger. Not really. Just a calm determination, a quiet certainty that my story was mine to write now. The phone buzzed again. Lena, the journalist. Do you want to meet for coffee? I'd love to hear about this new chapter, she said, curiosity tinged with respect. Yes, I said, smiling genuinely. I want to talk about what it feels like to stop hiding. Later, I sat at my little balcony table, sipping tea, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. I thought about my reflection in the window, the weight I once carried on my shoulders, the nights of doubt, the whispers of judgment. And I realized something. I had been small not because of my body, not because of their eyes, but because I had let them write my story. Now I wrote it myself. I traced the rim of my cup with my finger. I am the girl who refused to stay small, I whispered. I am the girl who chooses herself, every single time. I am enough. I always was. Nora's voice came through again. And you'll keep being enough, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. I know, I said, a smile breaking fully across my face. I know. The apartment felt alive now, as though it recognized the presence of someone who would no longer bend for anyone. I unpacked another box, and for the first time in years I did it with joy. With freedom. With a sense of ownership over my own life. I wrote a list in my journal that night. Goals, dreams, promises to myself. No one else's opinions were included. Not Ethan's, not his friends, not even my own past self's insecurities. Only mine. And as I closed the journal, I realized the truth I had been too scared to admit. I had survived. I had grown. And no bet, no cruel scheme, no whispered humiliation could ever take that away from me. For the first time, I slept without tension. I dreamed not of approval, not of love I had never received, but of the life I would continue to build, on my own terms, unapologetically, fiercely, completely. I was no longer the woman who hid. I was the woman who refused to stay small. And that was more than enough. I ran my hand over the steering wheel, feeling the leather's smoothness under my fingers. The city lights reflected in the windshield, distorted by the rain that had started falling softly. I wasn't going anywhere in particular, I just needed to move, to feel the motion under me, the hum of the engine, the air pushing back against my body. I whispered to myself, I was never the bet. I was never the mistake. Nora had called earlier, but I didn't answer. I didn't need anyone to validate this feeling. This was mine alone. The revelation had been simple yet shattering. My worth had never been determined by him, by his friends, by anyone's cruel amusement. I remembered the first time I had stepped into his world, white dress clinging, heart full of hope. This is it, I had told myself. This is love. This is acceptance. Instead, it had been a performance. My body the stage, my emotions the script written for someone else's amusement. Now I smiled faintly. And look at me, I said, voice low, almost a whisper. Still here. Still whole. The The phone buzzed, breaking my reverie. A message from Ethan. I didn't realize. I didn't even read the rest. I put the phone face down. His words could no longer pierce me. They never had. They were hollow now, echoes of a past I no longer inhabited. I slowed the car at a red light and exhaled deeply. He was empty, I said aloud. And that's why I felt small. Not because I wasn't enough, because he had nothing to give. Nothing at all. A horn blared behind me and I laughed quietly, startling even myself. I hadn't realized how much space I had taken up in my own life. The room, the air, the right to exist fully. For years I had been taught to shrink, to apologize for the body I lived in, the voice I used, the presence I occupied. I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back at me were steady, alert, aware. The softness around them remained, yes, but it was different now, tempered with understanding and strength. You survived, I said. You were the lesson, not the joke. The memory of his laughter with Marcus, Clara, and the others came to me, mocking, cruel, sure of my inability to fight back. But I had fought back in ways they couldn't see. Quietly. Without yelling. Without proving anything to anyone. I had reclaimed my life. I stopped at a familiar intersection, watching the wet streets reflect neon signs. I chose myself, I said. Every single day. Not because of revenge, not because of punishment, not because I wanted him to feel small. I chose me. Nora's words from our last session echoed in my mind. Revenge never heals. Self-respect does. Yes, I whispered. Yes, it does. I thought about the weeks after I had left our shared home, the nights journaling, the therapy sessions, the small victories that felt enormous. I remembered packing boxes, moving into my own space, claiming corners of the apartment that were mine alone. Each book, each plate, each piece of furniture had been a declaration. I exist. I matter. I remembered Lena, the journalist, asking me to speak publicly about the separation, and how I had chosen dignity over spectacle. I am enough, I had told the room. The silence that followed had been loud with comprehension. The world saw me, finally, without filters, without pity, without derision. The green light flickered. I drove forward, literally and figuratively. Every turn of the wheel felt like a confirmation of my autonomy. I wasn't running from him, I wasn't running from my past. I was moving toward myself. I pressed the accelerator gently, letting the tires hum against the wet pavement. I am not defined by anyone's judgment, I said. I am not defined by a bet, by cruelty, by the emptiness of another person. I am defined by how I love myself, by how I take up space, by how I honor my own story. A memory rose unexpectedly, the first time Ethan had smiled at me, a faint, practiced smile that never reached his eyes. I closed my eyes, let it fade. That image didn't hurt anymore. It was just an object lesson, a reminder of how far I had come. I thought about the love I had once craved, the acceptance I had sought desperately, and how naive I had been to tie my worth to someone else's perception. I don't need him, I whispered. I never did. The rain picked up, drumming softly against the roof. I watched droplets race across the windshield, each one a tiny prism of light. I thought about the hours of therapy, of talking to Nora, of unpacking both boxes and emotions. Each step had built something inside me that no one could break. I laughed quietly, a sound both sad and triumphant. I have been small for too long, I said. I have been invisible for too long. But not anymore. Not ever again. I took a deep breath, felt the weight of the past lift slightly. There was still healing to do, yes, still moments of doubt, still nights of reflection. But there was also freedom, unfiltered and undeniable. I am whole, I said. And I am unafraid. I drove past familiar streets, streets that once held humiliation, betrayal, and silence. I didn't linger. I didn't look back. My body, my mind, my heart, they all belonged to me now. I felt space inside me that had nothing to do with shrinking, nothing to do with apology, nothing to do with anyone else. I whispered one last time as I merged onto the highway, I am the lesson. I'm not the bet. I am my own story. And I will write it beautifully, fully, fiercely, without fear, without compromise. The headlights stretched ahead like an invitation. The road was open, wet, alive. I smiled at the reflection of rain on asphalt, at the glow of streetlights, at the simple, unstoppable fact that I had chosen myself. And as I pressed the pedal down, feeling the hum of the engine reverberate through me, I knew it was true. My body had never been the problem. His emptiness had been. I drove forward, alone, whole, and unafraid, into a life I would never let anyone else write.